All right, we are recording. And hello, everyone that's here. I'm Emily. I'm from New Entry, and I'm helping to facilitate this workshop today.
Great. Well, thanks, Emily. My name's Jennifer Hashley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. And I'd love to welcome everybody today to our second workshop in this series on climate record keeping. And today's topic will be on break-even analysis and scenario planning. And let's see, now my slides are not moving. That's how it always goes. That's me. Just a quick tech check. If you would like, you're welcome to rename yourself, add your pronouns, maybe your farm name or organization name if you'd like, so we know who you are. If you want to add yourself to the chat, we'd love also if folks want to add your name and pronouns and farm location and where you're located. And then just ask that if everybody can just keep themselves muted until our presenters are asking if there's any clarification questions or things, just to cut down on background noise. And definitely feel free to add questions to the chat. We will be monitoring that as we go so that we make sure if you need clarification on a point that's presented or need extra information about what we're talking about, don't stay confused. Please add your question to the chat so we can address it in real time. And we will have plenty of questions at the end for Q&A. And we are recording this session, and so your video is optional, but it is helpful to see you so that we know that you're understanding and can try to read the audience as we go. But we will turn the recording off at the very end when we have final Q&A. So if people want to ask specific questions about their enterprise that they didn't want to bring up before, you can do that with anonymity. So just a quick background on New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. We are located in Beverly in northeastern Massachusetts on the ancestral lands of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. And our mission is really to help improve our local and regional food system by training the next generation of farmers. And so we do these workshop series to continue to build the skills and capacity of farmers in our network and beyond. We have three main program areas: our farmer training programs, our food hub, and we run a national capacity building program for other land-based training programs across the country. Our farmer training programs include a lot of our courses, workshops such as this one, and we run an incubator farm program where we provide land access to folks to get started with their businesses. So we run a crop production course. It's about 8 weeks long. We've done it in lots of different formats, online, in person on the farm, and our next one will be starting in the spring of 2024. We're also developing a new practicum course this summer, so we're really excited about more hands-on experiential learning at New Entry. We also run a farm business planning course that happens twice a year. We just finished up our fall course. We are currently enrolling for our winter course, which is also online. So if you would like to sign up for that, the next course begins January 9th through February 27th. So you can find information about that on our website, and encourage you, if you need to update a business plan or develop a new one, you can do that in the class. Lots of great speakers and guests and things. We'd also love folks to consider participating in our financial benchmarking study. You can get paid to share your financial records. So we're recruiting folks that are small-scale vegetable, flower, herb farmers that have 2 or more years of growing experience so that you have some data to enter. And then the project consists of entering an intake form to give background about your assets and liabilities and create a little balance sheet for you. And then you would fill out some quarterly surveys of your income and expenses. And the purpose is to help you benchmark your performance against other very small scale farmers who are doing direct marketing and similar types of production. So you can see how you're doing and hopefully help you develop some strategies to increase your profitability. So there's a sign up sheet on our website, or you're welcome to contact Emily and we'll get you signed up for that. And then you can find out more about New Entry. We have lots of great stuff on our YouTube channel. You can take a virtual tour, listen to some farmers from the program. We have other trainings and things there you can take advantage of. If you are looking for new markets, we also, as I mentioned, run a food hub. So we do a lot of food access, have other market training and food safety programs, sell to institutions and schools. So if you'd rather somebody else manage all of that and you want a one-stop buyer, feel free to reach out to us for that. If you live in the area. If you also run a land-based farmer training program or just are interested in thinking about how that works, we have monthly networking sessions with our national network and an annual conference and other great resources. So feel free to reach out if you want more information about that. And again, this workshop series is part of a series that we're developing to really help folks look at your financial records, look at your production records, and be able to make decisions in the face of a changing climate and how that might be impacting your overall business health. And so there's lots of ways to look at data. And so we're hoping that this series will cover that and get you motivated and excited to think about how data can help you make better business management decisions as your farm is facing lots of variability. It's hard from year to year to predict. In a wet year or a drought year, how is that impacting your finances? And should you be adjusting your prices or looking at different crop mixes? All kinds of decision making can come out of having good records. So you can find all the information about this series on our website. If you go to the resource tab, to the Farmer Resource Library, and then the bump out, there's a climate record keeping tab. This is where we're storing all the workshop recordings. If you missed some of the earlier ones, we also have a student here, Yanine, who's helping pull together some fact sheets with the resources that are shared in each workshop. Those will be posted here on this website, so you can always refer back to that on this page. And again, all these workshops are free, and this is made possible from our funder, which I'll mention in a second. And we'd just love to make sure that you're learning. We have learning objectives for these grants and hope that they're being fulfilled, and the funder would love to know what you're getting out of this. And so we do this little poll before and after, and you'll receive a workshop evaluation afterward to help us determine whether you're able to apply what you've learned in your business. So if you don't mind just responding to these quick questions here that should be popping up on your screen, that would be great while I finish my introduction, and we'll move ahead with that. So tonight's session is around, or this afternoon session is around break-even analysis and scenario planning, and Cian Dalzell is going to be leading us through that. He's been farming for a while now and really enjoys keeping financial records. So he and his partner run Three Maples Market Garden. And he is also now working with the Carrot Project and doing lots of their financial record keeping workshops, and is one of their lead trainers for that. So he's got a lot of expertise in financial analysis and planning and competitive analysis and break-even analysis, scenario planning, all this fun stuff that we're going to talk about today. So we're really excited to have him here as well, and just wanted to thank our funder, the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Program, and USDA, National Institutes for Food and Agriculture, who make this work possible for us to share with all of you. So thank you, and I will turn it over to Cian to get us started.
Thank you. So I want to clarify one thing, which is that I enjoy this work. Oh no, it's not what's supposed to happen. I enjoy this work. I enjoy teaching record keeping. If you ask me in August if I enjoy my own record keeping, the answer will probably be something I can't say on this recording. We all have our own cycles of what we enjoy about our jobs, and mine is not always record keeping for my own farm. It is so much easier to look at other people's businesses and be able to help them with that. So today we're going to talk a little bit particularly about break-even analysis and some of the process of scenario planning, and we're going to finish up on scenario planning next time around with me, which is in early February. I want to specify that I'm a farmer, I'm a consultant. I do really enjoy things like spreadsheets and bookkeeping and lining everything up. I think of them as puzzles. So if you have any questions that you would like to geek out about, there's the Q&A portion after this, and you'll at some point or another can probably get my information to track me down. So because of the way that this is lined up, we have a little bit of a break between these, which gives us a great opportunity, or gives many of you the opportunity to start some of these processes, to do these with your own numbers for what we've done today, and really ask for support if you need it, or be prepared to go through the next step for your own businesses come February 5th. And I like to have that moment because I know as a farmer that as we go through these examples today and we go through numbers today, you're going to be thinking mostly about what we're talking about, but you're also going to be thinking about your own businesses. and that no matter what you're learning, the application side of things is always in your heads. So as you're thinking about that, remember that we're here to support you and that we're happy to do that. And it's a great option to get that started between the December 11th and February 5th sessions. So we're going to start with reports because they're a big portion of how to use as a base. And then we're going to talk about the break-even analysis and scenario planning. I do want to say before we really get started today that I realize that it's Hanukkah, and that at least if you're in the Eastern time zone, you may be delaying this, lighting menorah with your family to be able to join us today. And I really appreciate that because I know that that's a difficult decision, and I appreciate that you're putting the time and effort into the farming business, and that you and your family have taken this and prioritized this for today and joined us today. So we're going to start with reports. We talked a little bit about reports last time around, or last time with me last month. And realistically, all of the data that we put in terms of our bookkeeping is a lot of data. And so when we're putting all of this in, if you have software, it acts as a database, and then you get the reports out as summaries. And just like we talked about last time, the summaries are framed differently. So the reports, when you ask for a particular report, you're getting a different framing of all of the information that's available in the database. So it doesn't give you everything, because then you cannot actually read it and use the information. What it's doing is giving you just the information that you ask for. So if you ask for a cash flow statement, you just get the cash flow statement. If you ask for an income statement or a profit and loss, depending on your software or what kind of wording you use, those are the same thing. You get just the revenue and expenses, which is the profitability side of things. And if you ask for a balance sheet, you get the snapshot of where everything is right now. For the purposes of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to use the income statement. And we really use the income statement a lot as the basis for the tools that we use and build, usually in Excel if you're working with me, or in a spreadsheet program, to really be able to see, kind of build on what's going on and see the future of your business, or play with the ideas of what the future of your business might look like. So the income statement is a report to measure the profitability of an enterprise or of the business. You can run an income statement just for an enterprise or for your entire business. And if you use the Farm Financial Calendar tool, which we talked about last month, it's recommended that you look at this monthly. That is the kind of thing that it may be quarterly for some people. It may be that you've missed it for a while, or it may be something that you're looking at more often. Some businesses are really looking at that every 2 weeks if they're really fast paced and they're selling a lot of stuff, or if for a new enterprise, they may be looking at it more quickly, or for instance, if you have a really fast turnover. So it really depends on your business, but generally speaking, the monthly review is a good way to get that practice in and be looking at this information on a regular basis in terms of assessing the profitability of your business and kind of taking the temperature, seeing how you're doing. What it is a listing of revenue and expense categories, and looking at that really helps with that pattern of how to think about your business and how to think about how your business is doing relating to the goals that you set or setting new goals. So when we use the income statement in terms of what we do in spreadsheets, if you're working with the CARE project or a lot of technical assistance providers or business assistance providers, what we end up doing is doing things like your annual financial projections are based on an income statement. Your scenario planning is based on an income statement, or sensitivity analysis, or just monthly or weekly financial projections, which if you don't have monthly financial projections, I strongly recommend that you do that. It's a great way to make sure you're not bouncing checks, helps with the being able to sleep at night aspect of being a business owner. When you run an income statement, it looks like this. Of course, this is the general categories, and that's really how it frames your profitability. So it puts the revenue at the top, which is sometimes referenced as top line numbers, but the revenue, and then your cost of goods sold, which is COGS, and then it gives you a gross profit, which is the revenue minus the cost of goods sold. Then it shows you your operating expenses. I like to set them up in this order of grouping because it helps in terms of understanding for me and for a lot of my clients. This is not a definitive list. It is the list that often works for a lot of folks that I've worked with, and may help you see the profitability for your business with more detail. And that'll give you your operating income. So gross profit minus operating expenses, or revenue minus cost of goods minus operating expenses. And then underneath that, we like to put things as other income and expenses. And that includes grants, depreciation, and interest expenses. And that's really important, especially when you're doing the kind of looking forward, because the first thing you do is you look back to kind of get a sense of where you've been, and moving that stuff below your profitability determination, below your operating income, and separating it out means that it's still there, it's still visible, but that way when you're looking back so that you can make good projections, you're not getting those numbers kind of conflated and mixed in with your other numbers. So it's really useful to be able to specify where that goes. If you were doing your books in a spreadsheet, you're running on a cash basis almost exclusively. I have yet to meet someone who does spreadsheet on accrual. It's doable, but it's complicated. So if you're using the spreadsheet template that I have and that the Carrot Project has been giving out for the past couple of years, you're going to be working on a cash basis, and you're getting a cash flow summary by assigned category. So you can give those variable expenses and fixed expenses names, categories, just like you can in software, and it automatically will add that stuff together for you. However, this is not the same thing as an income statement. So you can take the summary and turn it into an income statement. And what you do to do that is you're just using revenue categories from your cash inflow, and you're only using expense categories from cash outflow. So the other categories would appear in your cash flow summary. They'll still appear on your balance sheet if you're making a balance sheet. But when it comes to the profitability, you wouldn't want to see all of that. It would get confusing. So if you're using a spreadsheet, if you need help making this work for you, let us know, and we'll help you get set up to be able to see this, because it can be really helpful for being able to move your business forward. And that being able to see what's coming is a huge part of the building resilience into your business that we're trying to really practice during this workshop series. If you use software, there are a bunch of different kinds of software. One of them, which I've seen more and more folks do, is working with Wave, because Wave is free or lower cost than, say, QuickBooks. So, pardon me, I have a client who's working with Wave now. I wanted to include this as an option. With any of the softwares that I've seen, almost all of them are online. Almost all of them have a sidebar, and there's a spot that says reports. So here on the left, there's a little highlighted blue, it says reports, and then it gives you the option of what reports you want to do. Generally, the less expensive the software, the fewer reports you can run, but the main three are typically there. So you're looking for a profit and loss or income statement, it's right there, and you end up wanting to run that report and export it into a spreadsheet format. If you're using Wave, it's a CSV format, a comma separated values. I want to point out that there is a point at which you get what you pay for. So this is a good step up option from a spreadsheet. Another kind of software is may or may not be the right fit for you, but Wave in particular, because you may not have heard of them before, they can be a really good step up for some farms and some other businesses that are fairly small and not terribly complicated in terms of what their books look like. Not a whole bunch of diversified enterprises. At that point, it often makes sense to make that bigger investment. But I will say that they alphabetize all of the account names within categories. So all expense account names are alphabetized. They do allow you to assign an account number, which was helpful. And we realized last year that if you use the account number at the beginning of the account name again, so that it's listed as the beginning of the account name, it will stack them in that order for you, because it automatically will put them in numerical order, which allows you to determine what order they appear in on your income statement. So if you are working with a software and you're trying to figure out how to make it easier to read an income statement, there may be a workaround like that. And it's a great opportunity when there are a lot of folks in the room who use different kinds of software to ask that kind of question. Like, how have you been able to figure this out? How do we try this out? Because this was, figuring this number thing out was really just a couple of colleagues of mine at the CARE project talking about what was or wasn't working for our clients, and thinking, hey, maybe we could try this, and it ended up working. If you do have QuickBooks, as it's clear that I do, you can run a profit and loss statement again in the reports. On the left-hand side, there's the bar that has reports as an option. And then profit and loss is one of the options that's pretty easy to find. There's a search by report name. There are lots of reports available in my version of QuickBooks because I pay a little bit extra for that. But I do want to point out that if you have QuickBooks Online, it lets you star favorite your reports. I love the idea that you have favorite reports, not just commonly used, but the ones that make you smile. And so we have the ability to hit that green star and have it at the top every time you go in, just so that you don't have to go looking for it again.
Cian, Cian, if I can break in, I think we have one question that's pertinent now, and the question is, how do you forecast cash flow and income in QuickBooks? And I think you could have a quick answer.
I can have a quick answer. Thanks, Jeff. You can do it in QuickBooks. There is a way to do that. It's something called budgets. And you can actually see it on the left-hand side of the screen right now. It's underneath time and above taxes. I don't really know why they choose the order they choose, but that's where it landed. QuickBooks calls it budgets. Budgets is projecting finances. There's a lot of benefits to doing that in the same place as your books for some businesses, but for the most part, most of my clients have preferred to do spreadsheets for their projections. And the reason is that it is much easier to edit them and update them. So with QuickBooks, you put the information in, and then it takes more clicks and more steps to go in and make those adjustments. If you have it in a spreadsheet, you type in a number, you hit tab, you're in the next cell, you type in a number, you hit tab, you're in the next cell, or enter, or however it works to move. And it's much faster to make those adjustments. And one of the things that I think a lot of folks struggle with, and I think that as things become, I'm going to go more variable. I'm going to go with more variable. As things become more variable, sometimes volatile, and we're responding to so many things in our environment as business owners and in our environment as people who work and live in the elements, that quickness and the confidence that comes with being able to look at it fairly regularly and have made those adjustments recently can be, the time ends up being really important. Someone put in the chat box that the lowest levels of QuickBooks Online do not actually let you run reports, and they don't let you export to Excel, I think. So make sure you have the right tool for you. And one of the things that I'm really specific about is that as someone who helps other business owners, I'm not going to tell you what the right tool is for your business. I'm going to talk to you about what your options are. I might help you try to figure out what might work for you, but it's your business. You are in the driver's seat and you get to make those decisions. So when it comes to something as important as how you look at your books, I might say, hey, I think you might be paying too much, or this seems really complicated to be using a worksheet, spreadsheet for, but I'm not going to tell you what the right tool is for you unless you cannot get what you need out of it. And then I'm going to say, this is not serving you because you can't get the reports you need. So figuring out what the right tool is sometimes a process, but it's worth seeing it through and getting the right tool for you. So generally speaking, I'm going to say that the income statement is the one I probably look at the most in terms of reports. I do try to keep an eye on my balance sheet. I definitely pay attention to how much cash is in the bank and what the cash flow statement looks like. But ultimately, I'm interested in seeing what the profitability of my business is and being able to make quick decisions based on the numbers I've got. And so the income statement is the one that I'm seeing more regularly, probably, than the other ones. When it comes to how to work with that, I encourage people to export it to a spreadsheet format. That's really useful. You can make those adjustments, but it's good to keep a copy not adjusted. You have one for the archives. And I will say that there are times, we're in rural areas. I'm in a rural area. There are times when our internet is not working. I can't necessarily go in and run a report. So having an archive of those reports, it's kind of like having that stack of bank statements. You know that they're there. And having that information somewhere is really helpful in moments. But if you don't have it, it can be kind of a crisis when you need it. So it's nice to have that saved copy. And then whenever you're going to be editing it, just have another copy and using the second copy as the basis for other financial tools. And again, you can build all kinds of tools based on your income statement. And we're going to really do that with your scenario planning today. Now I'm going to pause and see if how everybody's doing. I'm going to put everyone's faces up for a moment, because I can't see you otherwise. Can't see you anyway. If anyone is feeling terribly lost, please raise your hand, type in the chat box, unmute yourself and yell, wait. I think we got a thumbs up.
Diane has her hand raised as a question, I think.
Diane, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, Cian, how often are you looking at your income statement?
It depends on the time of year. I run a vegetable farm. I don't have to look at it for like 2 straight months sometimes, because I have not made any purchases. I have not sold anything. There's this nice, lovely period where I can do all the planning and not be actually looking at the updated statements, because there's not much to update. But I try to do it. I try to do it about once a month. I am a very small business. My wife and I run a small farm. Like we had about 6 acres until last year. It's pretty small. And some of that was in cover crop. So the idea of trying to figure out what's going to work for each business is a little bit fiddly. But I try to do it on my once a month rotation. I have it in my Google Calendar to do my monthly administrative bookkeeping. It's on an automatic every month.
Great, thank you.
All right, I think we're going to move forward with break-even analysis. And I want to say that break-even analysis is, when is it worth the work? I recognize, as someone whose farm does not pay the mortgage, that there are lots of reasons to make the work that we do worth it, and that we cannot put all of those reasons into numbers. However, figuring out what is worth it for you is going to be specific to your business. If you talk to my Uncle Mike, who is a CPA, or was a CPA and is now retired, he would tell you that a break-even point is at that $0, not a loss, not a profit. It's kind of a theoretical point. It's not something that people actually achieve in their businesses. The idea of did you lose money or gain money is really more simplistic than is helpful to us as business owners now. So the way that I think about it is not $0. It's at what point does this make business sense to do this? So that means that instead of just loss or profit, we're really thinking about what kinds of costs we need to be covering and what financial impact our decisions have brought to this point. So we need to cover the cost of production, the variable costs, the overhead, which are your fixed costs, debt service, which is a normal part of business ownership for many of us. And we need to plan for profit. You can't plan for the break-even point to include no profit and really feel like you're doing well as a business owner. So when we're talking about what the break-even point for your business is, it's what makes sense for you. But the specifics of that are very personal. So there's a process. We're going to look at numbers and kind of get a sense of what that would look like on paper. But generally speaking, you're doing a break-even analysis to find the point at which it makes sense for you to do something. And that could be the whole business. That could be an enterprise. If you have a new enterprise, you're making big changes to your business, making sure that it puts you past that balance point is really crucial, because the last thing you want to do is put all this energy into, say, a new enterprise and have it completely burn you out. Doesn't matter if it helped your business financially if you can no longer function, right? So figuring out what that looks like is really important to do, ideally ahead of time before you start actually doing the work for that business or that aspect of your business. But also building in buffer for business resilience. I don't know about anybody else, but 2023 was not great for my business's finances in some ways. I did not hit my financial goals. We had some weather issues that really hampered what we were hoping to do. And if we hadn't been looking at building in that buffer, it just wouldn't have been there. And it would have been much harder as business owners for us to keep the business going with a year like that. We don't really know what's coming year to year as the variability of our weather events and climate becomes a more regular reality that we're facing. Really being able to build that in, have it based and part of your everyday regular math is really helpful. There's also the chance of potentially paying yourself or your staff better, a living wage, enough to keep them around because you want one of them to eventually take over in succession planning. You can't really do those things if there's no money, and there won't be money if you don't plan for there to be money. There won't be money to pay people. There won't be money to reinvest in the business. There won't be money to fund a new enterprise that you're thinking about doing. So making sure that you're planning for there to be that extra cushion, that plan for profit, and that way you have a little bit of built-in resilience if things go a bit awry, figuring that sometimes that does happen. Often that does happen in some direction or another. So when we're talking about it from a strictly mathematical point of view, we talk about it as being part of this general formula of gross margin times break-even sales equals fixed costs plus desired profit. Because we want to figure out what the break-even sales are, we actually have to just isolate break-even sales to one side of the formula. And to do that, we get break-even sales equals fixed costs plus desired profit divided by 100% minus variable costs. I want to point out that especially if you're looking at this in terms of doing adding having a big change in your business, whether that's adding a new enterprise or investing in something, buying a big asset, those kinds of things really often come with debt service. And we don't always talk about it, but when you're planning on making a big change to your business, it can be really helpful to call out the debt service and make sure that it's there when you're doing this kind of math, separate from your fixed costs. Some people group them together, but because debt service is not exactly the same as fixed costs, and some businesses don't have debt service all the time, they only have them when they make these kinds of investments until they've paid them off, making sure that if debt service is going to be part of your business during the time or within the framing of this break-even formula that you're doing, you want to make sure that it's in there. So I want to point out that we talk about variable costs or costs of production as a percentage, typically when we're doing this kind of math, and fixed costs as a dollar amount. If you're doing this for a particular enterprise, you really might be thinking about not just the break-even sales for the business, but a particular enterprise's break-even sales. And you may have debt service associated specifically with that enterprise or fixed costs associated with that enterprise. And you might use the term desired contribution instead of profit, because it would be contributing within that enterprise to the whole farm business as opposed to the profit, which tends to be kind of framed as being part of the whole farm. Whatever it is that you need that enterprise to be putting in dollars wise toward the whole farm would be that desired contribution. And because we were talking last month about that multi-enterprise bookkeeping, this is something that if you have multiple enterprises, you might want to look at them separately. A couple of years ago, I think half of the people who signed up for the Carrot Project's Winter Workshop series had chickens and were trying to figure out how to do break-even analysis on their chickens. It was a huge thing because the cost of feed had gone up, and they all suddenly went, "Is this still making sense?" And that was those are those moments, right, when we need to be looking very specifically at one enterprise at a time. But in the end, they all have to contribute enough together to the farm to pay all of the farm's bills. We talk about cost of production or variable costs as a percentage, and I want to give you a visual for why that is. So for every dollar of revenue, if 56% goes to cost of production, there's 44 cents left. You don't have $1. You made $1's worth of revenue, but you don't have $1 because you already spent 56 cents to make the dollar. 56 cents was spent before the dollar even showed up. So you have 44 cents left. So every dollar that comes in as revenue, you automatically only have 44 cents left, which means that when you're thinking about things like paying your fixed costs or purchasing an asset from the money that you've accumulated or increasing the net profit, when you're looking at what's really going to make it worth the work, you're not looking at the dollars, you're not looking at the revenue, you're looking at the net. You're looking at what's left, which is the net contribution or the contribution. But it's also how you have to pay all of these bills. So if you have all these bills, you're not thinking how much revenue do I need from this farmer's market to make it make sense. You have to think about how many of those 44 cents, how many after the cost of production, after those variable costs are paid, how many of what's left do you need to be able to pay those bills? So just running through with some numbers to give you some kind of sense of what that looks like. If you take this formula and you replace in numbers, so fixed costs of $5,000, desired profit of $33,000, debt service of $2,000, and variable costs was, we're going to say 56%, because that's what it was in the example on the previous slide. So then you're adding all of that together, right? So it's $40,000 divided by 44%, which is $90,910. Now, for some people in the room, that might sound like a really big number. And for some people, that might not sound like a really big number. I want to point out that the desired profit of a number like that looks like this farmer is maybe paying themselves from the desired profit. Hopefully, in the long run, that would be a regular fixed costs. But realizing that a lot of folks aren't there yet, this might be how to figure out how to be paying yourself, right? If you're not doing that yet, or pay yourself more from the desired profit until you get to the point where it's a regular fixed cost. And again, not everything ends up being strictly speaking by the numbers, right? We might specifically have paying to keep the property tax affordable. And so that might be part of those, you might add that to the calculation. It might be that that 90,000 minus the difference that you have from your taxes by keeping that agricultural zoning. And that might dramatically change the numbers. You might have animals providing manure as fertilizer to other crops. You might be using pigs to clean up an orchard, or goats to clean out brush. You might do agritourism, and you have some animals that are really not paying much. You're hoping that they cover their costs, but they're a marketing tool. Or you might have an apiary for pollination support, but you're not really making much out of the honey. The idea is that all together, the whole farm needs to break even or better when all of those enterprises are put together. So if you have a couple of cute animals to bring people to your blueberry, to the pick your own blueberries, that's part of your whole farm. And even if the animals aren't necessarily, paying for all of their feed because you're keeping them to be more pretty than bacon, there's a point at which if they're not adding to the number of people coming in and they're not adding to the business as a whole, they no longer make financial sense. Does that make sense to everyone? Have I lost people? Did I offend any of the chicken farmers? I love chickens. I love eggs. I just know that they can be a little bit tenuous as a financial prospect right now with the feed costs. Got a thumbs up. All right. Don't see anybody looking lost. I want to give everybody an opportunity to remember that we tend to sit wrong when we're doing this. Might just be me. Maybe it's just, this is my reminder for my own posture. So scenario planning, which is probably why most people actually signed up, determining how a big decision can impact your business. It's pretty important to think through that ahead of time. So it helps with specific scenario changes. I want to point out that if you Google scenario planning, please don't. But if you did, like I did a few weeks ago, just to see what would come up, so that I could have this conversation. There are about 1 million options. You might look specifically, see stuff from like business magazines and from a bunch of different schools. And I saw everywhere from 2 to 10 or 12 steps in a scenario planning process. I saw a bunch of different kinds of scenario planning. For the purposes of what we're going to talk about, we're really talking about the financial impact on your business of making one big change. If you try to make things more complicated, it just makes things kind of too complicated to really think through. So we're going to try to keep it a little bit more simple, realizing that it doesn't solve all of your problems. It's not the only conversation, but we're going to call scenario planning projections with one specific big scenario change in mind. It gives you a structure. We're going to walk through the structure to figure out what the financial impacts are of that kind of significant change. And I want to point out that it is something that if you're making a big change, looking at what the numbers will look like and what kind of decision impacts that decision can have on your business is really important to do ahead of time. If you've made a big change and now you're kind of wondering what's going to happen, it's a good time to do that work. But if you're thinking about making investment, it's the best time to do that work. But when it comes to that, it's a really good way to kind of assess, does it make sense to invest in that particular thing right now? And I want to be specific about the right now thing, because it does maybe make sense to put off a purchase while you're dealing with something else. So it doesn't mean that if you're looking at something and it doesn't make sense to put in that solar panel right now, that it's never going to happen. It just means that this isn't the right time for it. And you can do this again next year to figure out if it is the right time then. Generally, when you're going to be doing something like this, you have to pick one and run with it, just like when you keep your books. Typically, most folks that I know are working with this in terms of a cash flow projection. And the reason is that if you're doing cash flow projection, you're assessing the cash flow and projected cash position. And that helps you figure out when the right time is to do something, because you need money to be in the bank all the time. So if you're doing that, you run the reports in cash, you run your projections on a cash basis. I have occasionally known businesses that are not farms to run something like this in accrual with accrual projections. It's usually for a smaller aspect of the business and not the business as a whole, because they assume that they're going to have cash in the bank. It's generally speaking, accrual is the best way to assess the profitability of, say, a new enterprise or the impacts on profitability that a big investment might make. If you do decide that that's the right fit for you, you run reports in accrual and you do your projections on an accrual basis. You just got to pick one and run with it. We're going to do cash basis because that's what most farms seem to do most of the time. We have a good checklist. I love a checklist. This helps me as someone who tends to get lost in particular steps. So you all get to come along with me on that. Having a series of steps means that we can go back and say, where are we in this process? So we have this lovely step. It's 7 steps. 1 is review historical financials, project financials. 2 is project financials for the business or enterprise as is. So if there were no big changes, and then discussing one significant change and anticipated impact. 4 is project numbers with that significant change in mind. Those are the 4 we're going to do today. And then when we come back in February, we're going to look at the sensitivity analysis, which is number 5, creating a range of reasonable scenarios. That's what a sensitivity analysis is. And then we're going to discuss options and scenarios as number 6, and decide and act parenthetically with confidence. The hope is that doing this process will allow you to act with confidence, you and your decision makers in your business, and know that this is a good decision for you as a business right now. Again, we got a lovely break between December 11th and February 5th. It's a good opportunity to say, hey, I want somebody to walk through this process with me for my business. It can be a lot easier if you haven't done this before, or if it's been a while, or if this is something that you're doing by yourself, to have somebody with you, have a sounding board, have somebody kind of hold your hand through a process like this. So if you feel like any of that might be you, send an email to Jeff Cole and we'll make sure that you can get the support that you need to go through this process for your business. There is a point when you are making any decision, there are many points when you're making a decision for your business where you go, yeah, that's not going to work. I call those gut checks. Generally speaking, you can kind of opt out right? Anywhere along the way when you're looking at something going, nope, that doesn't make sense. Not going to do that this year. And I joke that my wife and I have done this on our farm every year with something. We can't make all the investments that we want when we want to do them. We always want to do them all right away. And so in the process of determining what the next investment is for our business, other things get jettisoned. We're like, those numbers don't make the most sense this year. Let's not look at it until next year. And then every winter we can go through this kind of list. And so there is no shame in saying those numbers didn't work. Let's try something else. This isn't the right time for that. And generally speaking, after that conversation with whoever is part of the decision making in your business about what that significant change is and the impact that it might have, that's a good time to say, hey, that conversation means that's not a good investment right now. And then projecting those numbers. You project the numbers and you say, those numbers really don't make sense. And it's a clear no. Then that's a good time to stop. You don't have to do a sensitivity analysis if it's really clearly not going to work out financially speaking. And then toward the end, right? Just one of the decisions is a no, right? Decide and act with confidence. Maybe the confident act is saying this is not the right time for this investment. That's okay. We don't have to use other people's meters for what progress looks like for our businesses. It's your business. You get to decide. And everything that we do when we're doing these kinds of projections, we get to decide based on what works for us in the future. The only way to know what the future looks like is by seeing what happened in the past and figuring out what those impacts were and how those things will change. So step one, review historical financials. We ran a report earlier. We saw how to run reports in 3 different ways earlier. Every one of those reports is going to a spreadsheet format if you're working with me, because I love a good spreadsheet. And it's going to look like this. These numbers don't matter right now. We're not looking at the details. What I want you to see is that it has income at the top, and then it has expenses. And because we grouped the variable expenses together and the fixed expenses together by alphabetizing, direct operating, labor, and repairs and maintenance are highlighted. It's actually maintenance and repairs. I apologize. I de-alphabetized my own system. Maintenance and repairs grouped together, and then occupancy, one-time costs, and overhead and administrative are grouped together. I will fix this before the PDF goes out so that people don't end up emailing me about it. I want to point out that since one of the goals that most of us end up having is paying ourselves better, I specifically added an owner's draw, which is separate. It's down at the bottom. Depending on how you keep your books, it doesn't necessarily show up on the profit and loss statement. If you are not doing it as a regular expense, but you're doing it only based on pulling money out of the profit, it shows up on your balance sheet. It shows up on your cash flow, but it doesn't always show up on your income statement. So we added that in. I wanted to highlight that paying yourself is important when you're doing these projections, even if it would otherwise not show up on your income statement. You want to make sure that paying yourself is on there. I often tell people that I once had a client who paid herself a penny a month so that it showed up on every report she ever ran. It was its own line, ran on her profit and loss statement. She added a line, farmer's salary, 1 penny a month. And that way she couldn't forget that that was one of the goals for herself and that she was working toward that. So whatever works for you to make sure you're thinking about that is important. I wanted to highlight that for those of us who struggle to pay ourselves as much as we would like to from our businesses. So that was step one. We ran a report. Step two, we're going to pretend we're not making any big changes, and we're going to project the financials based on that. If you do monthly reports, you can do that month to month and add them all together. That works really well for a lot of folks. But figuring out what things look like and what they might look like next year is really part of that, is figuring out the narrative of what happened last year, and not to get too bogged down, literally or figuratively, in the details. We have to talk about what we expect to have happen, and that may include what weather might look like. And right now, NOAA is projecting that there's a 62% chance of a continuation of El Nino between April and June of 2024. So we don't know what the weather's going to look like, but that's as far as their projections go. and it's still not particularly certain. Do you have any new small equipment and tools to consider? What anticipated regular staffing changes might be happening? Do you have people coming back or not? Are there new efficiencies that you have because of your experience or systems that you've built for your business? And then market changes, which is its own conversation for a lot of folks, but part of projecting your financials, it's not what you can produce, it's what you can sell. So the market changes are important. There's economic changes in your community, farmers market or farm stand traffic estimates, expected changes with main customers. As somebody who spent tons of money at your farm stand last year moving away, that can make a huge difference. People don't think about it that much, but every so often, that can really mess up your numbers. So if you know somebody well enough to know if they'll let you know, that's a great thing to keep track of. And then marketing changes within the business. And that might be who's running the marketing. That might be what social media sites you're hooked up with, or what sites you're hooked up with in terms of things like the farm exchange websites. Maybe you're connected to a hub now and you weren't last year. It's all of those kinds of changes of where your money is coming from or where your stuff is going can be part of that market change. So when you're having those conversations, you might say potential for relatively wetter spring and drier summer and fall, which is the opposite of what we had in 2023 on my farm. I got a new seeder last year paired with my greens cutter and the bubbler that I'm hoping to make this winter from parts and some plans from UVM. That could make a pretty big difference in terms of what our greens would look like. But for the whole business, it's not a big impact. It's not a big investment. The investment was last year. And now we're just seeing what systems building with the new tools is going to look like. Maybe you have part-time summer staff or childcare. That's new. It's not a huge difference, but it's still going to make a difference in how that works for you. You might have a better sense of what the fertility, weed, sun, drainage is on a new field, or storage at a new field, reducing transit time, which just makes it a much more efficient process from harvest to market. You might be adding a farmer's market, but it's not a giant percentage of what you expect your revenue to be. Or building partnerships with local employers to increase your CSA size, or new road signs, which is a marketing thing to increase your farm stand traffic. All of those things are fairly small and end up impacting numbers, but aren't a one big change. So they're part of the step 2 of projecting those numbers. And you want to do the variable costs and fixed costs a little bit differently. Variable costs, because they're an expense that varies with production output, it's a percentage of your revenue that you're focusing on. So if your expectation is that you're going to increase significantly or even incrementally, if you have a 10% increase that you expect in terms of your production and potential sales, the percentage of revenue that goes to the variable costs is probably not going to change that much. It's going to move in correlation to your revenue fairly closely. And that usually includes, but doesn't always include, direct operating, labor and payroll, and maintenance and repair. And then fixed costs are a dollar amount. If I'm increasing my production next year, my insurance amount doesn't really change. My bank fees might go down because I'm more likely to have a little money in there, but aside from that, they shouldn't change. And things like the rent on the property doesn't change. The amount that you might be paying for your software shouldn't change. So those fixed costs are really that dollar amount. And the dollar amount might go up a little bit, but it doesn't go up or down with your production output. And that often, but doesn't always include occupancy, one-time expenses, and overhead, or overhead and administrative stuff. So again, we have this information from last time. I want to say that this is impossible to read for a lot of folks, especially if you have a smaller screen. And the fixed expenses are not really what we want to focus on for this. So we're gonna just collapse them so that we're not looking at them all the time. And when you're looking at your projections, you might want to do it in 2 different ways. You might find that one of these ways makes more sense for you and for your business, or that it makes sense to have 2 different people do it, one from each direction. But generally speaking, the top-down projections, the CEO or CFO mindset, might be a big number, a revenue change, or a big increase or decrease, bigger increase or decrease in sales. Whereas the bottom up, which I find a lot of folks are really more comfortable with, really tends to start with operational capacity and determine dollar amounts from that. So it's really more of a worker mindset. If you have your hands in the soil, if you're really dealing with the animals on your farm, you may really be thinking about the operational mindset. The bottom up may make more sense for you. So that's a production change that you think that the business could handle, and it might be built from those monthly numbers if you have monthly reports from last year or from the past few years. So with the fixed costs shrunk down, this is what that might look like. Again, the numbers aren't particularly important. What I want to point out is that the percentages are pretty consistent. They wobble a little bit within the decimal points of the percentages. It's 3.2 and 3.4, something like that. But generally speaking, the percentages of what each of the direct operating, labor and repairs and maintenance stuff is all going to be pretty close typically. One thing that might change is you might decide specifically to be looking at labor and increasing people's pay. You might specifically be looking at individual lines. And I like the notes for this, not just for the purpose of knowing what I was thinking when I put this together, but in terms of for my own business, having those notes really helps as I'm looking at it and saying, why isn't this matching up to what I expected? So if I have no expected increase in the CSA sales, but then it does increase, that shifts the numbers, or fewer people sign up, and then we want to try to make up the difference, where is that going to have to come from? You might want to specifically make a note of what percentage inflation you expect to have happen and kind of make adjustments to the other numbers based on that. For similar reasons, occupancy, I put in a slight increase. One-time costs are things that you don't necessarily expect to need to buy, but it's nice if you have the capacity to build in a budget for that, because that might be something you have to do. For the purpose of this example, I specifically put in $2,000 because I expect that I'm going to need to repurchase some items that took a walk from one of my fields last summer. And I need to buy new ones, but the tools themselves aren't assets. So they're not a capital purchase. I'm not buying an asset, but they're also not a regular purchase. I wasn't planning on buying a new weed whacker this year, but now I need one. And then if you have things that are changing that bring those numbers down, make note of those too. If you looked at the general administrative and said, wait, why did the number go down? Well, maybe last year went to a conference. This year you're not planning on going to the conference. That reduces the costs there. So even if other costs go up, like shipping, if you're postage, if you're shipping things out, you have that more detailed somewhere and noted somewhere. Now that you have your historicals for 2023, you have your as-is numbers for 2024, now you're going to figure out what that big significant change is and what that impact could be. This starts as a conversation with notes with whoever the decision makers are in your business. And if you don't have other decision makers in your business, if you want to process through something like this, that might mean buying a friend a coffee. It might mean having someone in particular or trying to contact someone who's also a farmer and just being like, hey, I'll listen to you if you listen to me, and trying to get that sounding board. It's important not to do this in complete isolation because you miss part of the impact. There's always something that any one of us doesn't see, and somebody outside of your head tends to see more of those things. So it can be really helpful to have that. The one significant change is whatever your significant change might be for your business. If you're planning on having more than one significant change in a year, it can be really, really complicated to try to do them at the same time in terms of a scenario plan. So doing 2 scenario plans and looking at them one and then the other, or one and deciding on that one and then the secondary one to see if that also makes sense to do on the same timeline, can be a longer process, but it's worth taking the time and doing the process in smaller steps. It's really hard to see what the impacts can be of trying to do a significant staffing change and a big building project at the same time, because the changes can be pretty different. And so it just makes sense to take that time and give yourself the capacity to focus in to get the best information. When you're doing this and having these conversations, you want to be looking at not just the potential increase of revenue in the first year, or will there be an increase of revenue in the first year, and then what expenses will increase, what assets may be purchased, how will the change affect operations on the farm. I like to point out that construction can be really disruptive. You might not be able to use your regular driveway if you're putting in a farm store. Those kinds of adjustments are things that are not always planned for and are worth making note of. And then, do you need a loan, or do you need financing, and what does that look like? And then the ongoing debt service, making sure that you can cover those costs. I also want to specify that you don't always see the increased revenue in the first year. Often, big investments come in midway through the year. There might be a shipping issue on an implement that you're buying and it doesn't show up until later, or there's a delay because of permitting, or waiting for a loan or a grant to come through. And you might not see a significant or any increased revenue in the first year. You might have all of that money going out in the first year and only start seeing that benefit to your revenue in the second year. And so preparing for that potential can also be part of this conversation. What is your anticipated timeline, and what will it look like if there are delays? Now that you've had the conversation, you need numbers to go along with it. And to do that, we go into a spreadsheet. For the purposes of today, we're only looking at it in a PowerPoint presentation, but having a spreadsheet that lets you play with the numbers is really helpful, because you will end up making a lot of adjustments over the course of however long you've given yourself to make those adjustments, to toy with the numbers. Well, if this is a problem, maybe we can do this other thing instead. Can we delay this other purchase to make wiggle room in our cash flow? That kind of stuff is so much faster to do in a spreadsheet. So we took our projections from step 2. These are the projections for 2024. And then we're going to adjust them to reflect on one significant change. I put in a new wash station. I put one in because I just spent 2023 with an insufficiently sized wash station during an El Nino event. And so I don't know about anybody else, but I was really soggy and not very happy with it. I think that anything that, when it comes to being able to control the environment in which we and our staff members work, or in which we are growing particularly sensitive crops in particular, having that capacity to add those greenhouses, those wash stations, that climate control, is a way to build resilience into our businesses in relation to climate variability. It used to be that you might be able to expect to have some dry days and be fairly confident you would be able to dry out the greens mix if you had it just under a market tent. And that might not be the case anymore. It might just be too wet. Or it might be that it's, too dry or too wet to be able to really confidently expect the yields that you want to be able to bring to market. And so figuring out what those adjustments look like for having a few fewer variables for some aspects of your business can be a really helpful thing to think about when it comes to how to build resilience, climate resilience into your business. And also just being a happier person, not having to stand in the rain all the time. So if you have this kind of projection, assuming that this is a construction plan, we're not going to see all of the impacts right away. But I want to be able to point out that there are certain things that you might specifically want to look at. You want to look at the revenue, how much of that is going to happen or change is going to happen in the first year. You might look at your labor. One of the things to think about when it comes to construction projects is that you, as the business owner, are going to be dealing with a lot of things. You're going to be dealing with permits. You're going to be dealing with inspectors. You're going to be dealing with construction workers, or not really supervising them, but you're going to be involved in some of that. And so if your plan is to put up a building and deal with contractor, you're going to be dealing with a lot of things other than being in the field. And to do that, you may need to specifically be hiring to replace your work in the field, and realizing that you, like we talked about last time, you're probably worth 2 people in the field for a lot of things, making sure that you have the capacity and have budgeted for having the appropriate amount of staff to make sure that you are not working by a headlamp at midnight to make up the difference is really important. Then there are those specific to that project expenses, which it's really helpful to be able to put in its own separate spot. I often add that when I'm working with clients in terms of their other income and other expenses, because even though in the end you might end up with the asset of the building, there are other aspects of it that may not be part of that asset, like the permitting or some of the electrical updates that you may not see as part of that ultimate asset. And so pulling all of that stuff out and putting it in its own section so you can look at it in isolation can be really helpful. And you may decide to add in your chart of accounts that particular project, or a line for dealing with that project. If you get a grant, you might have grant income and grant expenses, and those might go in your grant expenses. So looking at that project in particular and having those numbers in mind, especially because that's where the biggest percentage difference is. You are not as likely to see a huge distinction in the amount of fuel that you're using. It might change a bit, but it might not change as much as those specific key categories, whatever they are for your big change. And I also want to point out that that number can look a little bit scary that first year, right? Because we're not seeing the full impact in the first year, and things like big investments pay off over time. But it's important to see what that's going to look like for the first year, and how much impact it will have, and how much financing you're going to need. So doing this kind of projection with the one big change means that you need a loan, probably, or some kind of financing to get over that first year potential deficit that you now anticipate with this change. So I want to check in, see how people are feeling about that. I realize that there's a process. Do you feel like you could follow that series of steps for your own business? Does anyone want to say that they're excited to have these conversations or don't really know how to have them? Show of hands who's emailing Jeff so that they can get set up with one-on-one support. Complete silence. All right, I'm going to assume you are all just so asleep that you're not ready to have these conversations yet. Okay, so we specifically built this into two pieces. A sensitivity analysis is part of the scenario planning process, but it takes enough time that it didn't seem like it would really make sense to try to do it all in one day. And having it split up like this, hopefully will give people the chance to do the two pieces for their own businesses separately. So I'm hoping, this says next week, but it's actually next time. I'm hoping that you'll be able to have done some review of your own historical financials and projections before February, and that will be able to really steep yourselves in the idea of the sensitivity analysis. But I do want to point out that the reason for it is to create that range of reasonable scenarios, because any one set of numbers that we create for our businesses is never going to be exactly right. And so making sure that instead of saying this is what the number is, we're saying, okay, this is where I think we're going to land. It might go a little bit up or a little bit down from there. What would a little bit up or a little bit down look like, and why? And same thing as we did today, but with those in mind, those notes of why numbers might go up or down. And we'll do that for the same business impact. And then hopefully we'll get some engagement in terms of discussions of options and scenarios. Otherwise, the folks who work for New Entry are going to have to voice their theoretical opinions on this. And then we'll be able to have that informed decision. So that's what we're doing next time around. I want to make a note that somebody in the chat reasonably and honorably admitted that they are behind on their QuickBooks. And I'm going to say that it is December and it is time that we all clean those things up. I spend time every fall and early winter figuring out exactly what I did wrong over the summer, because I find that As a vegetable grower, my QuickBooks is imperfect during the summer, and I end up having to make some attempt at cleaning everything up once it gets a little bit darker in the evenings. So I will say that it is important to recognize that it's never going to be perfect. Bookkeeping is a process, and I'm glad that you were able to say, I need to spend some time with this. I'm going to book myself some time with this. And I hope that you will reward yourself for doing that. I will tell you that when I do my QuickBooks, I give myself chocolate. It's what I do, so that I remind myself that it's good to do. I also, before we get too bogged down and scared, I know it's going to be a while before we talk about this again. I wanted to give you a sense of what projecting further out will be, because of the negative $42,000, almost $43,000 at the end of our projections with an investment for this example. It looks scary. And as a business owner, I might look at that and just be like, nope, that's not, I don't know how to do that. Seems risky. Seems too risky. And really what we're trying to do with doing these kinds of projections is we're trying to reduce the risk that comes with making changes, financial changes for your business. So it's mitigating risk. It's not, there's always going to be some risk involved in doing things like borrowing money. But if you have the plans in place and you expect that things will go fairly well for you, you can make that seem less risky and really make that informed decision. So I decided, so that no one freaked out and spent the next month and a half being like, Cian's crazy, want to build a wash station that's going to cost 50 grand. What are you doing? If you do that next step of projections for 2025, you see more of that revenue impact. You see an increase in revenue because you have a more efficient system, and you have the systems that you've been working on and stumbling over each other and moving where the tables are to make sure that you get the best flow of use of this building, right? And you can see that potentially in the reduced percentage of variable expenses between your expectations for 2024 with the new wash station and 2025. So looking a little further out when it comes to a really big change like building a building can be really important because of that delayed timeline and the fact that it just takes a while to really see that impact and get those systems in place. So when we're doing that, it's important to do the first year, what does the 2024 look like? And then it's also important to look at that further out if you know that it's going to have that ongoing debt service or it has that kind of return on investment that's a few years out. So I wanted to do this for folks. So I want to point out that although the variable expenses dollar amount went up for 2025, the percentage went down. The percentage of variable costs, that cost of production went down. And the numbers for the fixed costs went up just a little bit, just as we would expect them to. And if you have a lot of debt and that concerns you, you might not be giving yourself a raise yet. But that if you add together the expected leftover, the expected net from 2023, and the expected net from or debt service capacity for your business in 2025, that's almost all of the deficit that you expect to have in 2024. So figuring out what that longer impact is and how long it's going to take for you to be able to pay off an investment like this is part of that mitigating of risk. So don't worry if the numbers for the first year of a new project might look a little bit scary. If that's the case, projecting out further can really help. And I want to point out that I realize that people are not all in Massachusetts, but we're in Massachusetts. And one of the things that's part of a grant program in Massachusetts is getting a business plan. And I happen to work with some folks who do that. And so I help them do their financial histories and projections. And the state asks for 3 years back, 3 years of history, and 3 years projected. So that 3 years of projection is aimed at really seeing what the financial impact is for the business of the kinds of investments that they're making in their business as part of the grant program. So that 3 years out is a great way if you're thinking about making a really big investment, if it feels like a big leap, that can be really helpful. And it can also be really helpful if you're going in for financing, because if you go into a bank and you can provide them with the information that you've thought through this and this is what seems reasonable to you, and you have that narrative to go along with it, you seem like a better bet. So it's good for you, and it's good for asking for money as well. So over the course of the next month and a half, I want you to think about this for your own businesses, right? What does break even look like for your business? What are the financial needs that your household has from your business that you maybe haven't been accounting for? And what maybe haven't you been accounting for in terms of things like debt service or a regular income for yourself that you need to add in to your break even? And sometimes I will say that I've worked with a lot of farms where the break even, they're not there yet. And it doesn't mean that you're not at your break even point and so you're going to close the business. It might mean that, and there's no shame in that. Sometimes businesses do close, but saying, this is where I need to be and this is the timeline I'm giving myself to get there. You might, need to work off farm more than you would have anticipated, or for longer. You might not be at a point where the farm can be paying you enough for you to have only on-farm employment. And you may or may not be planning for that in the long run. But if that is a goal for you, it takes time to reach those financial goals. And so doing a break even doesn't have to be a way to look at a farm not making sense or an enterprise not making sense. It's a way to look at where you're at now and where you need to get to. And so if you do a break even analysis and you're not there yet, you know what a goal is to set for your business. And then as you're doing those kinds of projections for your business, you can say, what changes do I need to make? What decisions do I need to make to get me closer to this goal, this break even number that I have come up with for myself? And then doing financial projections for 2024 for the whole year, or if you do monthly ones for each month in the year, what significant changes are in store for your business? Is there that one significant change that you want to make, or are there significant changes coming? What impacts would making that kind of change have on your business? And of course, would having assistance help set your business up for success? And if it would, please reach out to Emily, reach out to Jeff, get yourself set up with some one-on-one support for that, because this is a good opportunity for you to really focus on getting this help you need to set yourself up for success. And then next time, we're going to go into a lot more detail on sensitivity analysis. So we did the scenario planning. We have this is what we expect to have happen set up for the scenario. And then we're going to use the same scenario next time. And we're going to talk about what that range of possibilities, reasonable possibilities, looks like, and what narratives might go along with that. And then we're also going to do a competitive analysis. And as previously stated, I am a nerd. I love competitive analysis. I find them really enjoyable. I realize that a lot of other people have never done one for their business, but it feels a little bit like spying on on the other businesses in your area, which can be kind of fun. It might be extra fun for me because I have small children who enjoy spying right now. But figuring out how to create from nothing a way to see where you are in your marketplace is kind of fun. It feels almost like magic, but also like data analysis. And so those are the two things that we're going to focus on in February. And that we ran a little short because I wanted to make sure we had a lot of time for questions today. So I want to make sure that people have the opportunity.